Okay, I'm going to share on the screen. I'm going to put the Kapach edition of the Shemona Perakim, which I find to be very clear. And as necessary, we'll consult the other ones. So what I want to do is, it's there in front of you on the screen. I hope you're familiar with this introduction. I don't want to read it inside like we did last time. I'm going to talk about it generally, and you can consult it as needed, and I'll put up the other Marmakaims too. So just generally, what the Rambam does over here in this introduction to the Shemona Perakim, he starts off by reminding us of something that he wrote in his introduction to Pirush HaMishnayos, and the Rambam's introduction to Pirush HaMishnayos, which is in the introduction to the Rambam's Pirush HaMishnayos. He explains why this author, that is Rabbeinu HaKadosh, why this author inserted this Masechta of Avos in the Seder of Nezikim. And the Rambam further reminds us that he told us then in the introduction to Mishnayos what great Tayeles there is in this Masechta. So 2 points. Firstly, the Rambam begins his introduction by referencing the author of Mishnayos. He calls him the author. He talks about what brought this author to include Avos in Nezikim. This author is, of course, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who the Rambam calls the author. That's Arabic word for the author. He calls him that. I found it 9 times that the Rambam uses the term the author in Pirush HaMishnayos. And the author is Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So the Rambam is telling us something about the author. In other words, he doesn't just talk about the book. Why is the order of this book such that Pirkei Avos is in Nezikim? He tells us that he wants us to think about why the author of this book made the decision of including this Masechta in Nezikim. And he tells us to look back in the introduction to Mishnah for that. And this I'll bring you to, I'll show you the introduction to Mishnah. I'll bring you that screen here. Okay, you see the screen now, the Chachma? So here, what does the Rambam tell us about why Avos has to be in Nezikim? So he says the following. He says, after the Rebbe completed discussing things that the Shoftim need to know, hold on, it disappeared. Then he began Avos. Says the Rambam, the purpose of Avos being in Nezikim is for 2 reasons. Firstly, he wants to tell you that the Messiahs and the Kabbalah is true. And it was accepted in groups, numerous people from numerous people. And therefore, you have to have respect for the Chacham and be machshav him. Because he and his generation is like the people in the prior generations. And he quotes the Gemara, then we should look after every Bezdin that's prior to him, back to Moshe Rabbeinu, Shimshon B'dari, Kishmul B'dari, Ubezeyes Musal B'nei Adam, Shalayomu Mishpat Pliny the Kabbalah. Why should we accept the Mishpat from Pliny? In other words, this whole pickbook, someone can be mefaktik on Chazal. Why should we listen? What makes Chazal an authority? Okay, the Rambam asks this question right here. What makes Chazal an authority, either for Mishpatim or for Takanas? And the answer is because there's a Messiah. The answer is it's Ein Adavar. It's not Pliny. It's Hashem Asher Tzivonu Boi Ki HaMishpat Alekem Hu. Because of this Messiah. So the purpose of Masechtas Avos, says the Rambam, is to teach us the Messiah. And the purpose of teaching us the Messiah is to teach us why the Chachamim, the Chachmei Messiah, have a status of an authority that we should listen to them. And what is that doing in Nezikim? Because Nezikim is about, or the parts that prior to Masechtas Avos are about the Dayanim. So we're talking about the leaders, people of power, the people of political power. And Pirkei Avos is telling us, well, who are these people? Why are we respecting them? And the answer is because there's a Messiah. And that's, of course, the first parak and the second parak of Masechtas Avos too, which goes through Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai, and goes through all the chain of the Messiah. And if you look at the Rambam in his Akdama to Mishnah Torah, where the Rambam does the same thing in much more detail, we'll get to that. The Rambam in Akdama to Mishnah Torah goes through all the Doros, Moshe, Yeshua, and he goes Pinchas, B'chulu B'chulu, Eli, goes 40 names till he gets to Rav Ashi. He stops at Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, significantly, and then he goes to Rav Ashi. And that mirrors what we have in the first parak of Pirkei Avos, which goes from Moshe till Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, and the second parak also talks about Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, and then further details about the Messiah. So the purpose of Perakim is to teach us the Messiah, and the purpose of the Messiah is to know why should I accept the judgment of these judges? Why should I accept their takanos? That's one reason. The second reason, says the Rambam, v'hakavana hashniya, that the Masechta wants to teach us the musar of each chacham, so that we should know the virtuous character traits. Those who require this more than anyone else are the judges. Because Ami Aretz, if they're not Balei Musar, are not going to harm the tzibur. They'll only harm themselves. While the Shoftim, if he's not a Bal Musar, he's going to be lost and he's going to lose people too. And therefore, says the Rambam, the beginning of Avos is about Musar Shoftim Hayusum Bedin. In other words, the ethical teaching of Avos, says the Rambam, are important more than for anyone else. They're important for the Shoftim, for the leaders. And he says that's alluded to, or by the fact that the Mishnah gave a primacy. The first thing mentioned in Masechtas Avos is something about judgment, is telling us that you know who this is really for, more than anyone else, is the judges. And then the Rambam gives an arichas gedola how judges have to really have good midas, as you can see. Mamash and arichas, which seems to be completely out of context here. He goes on and on about how important it is for the judges to have good midas. Okay, so what I want to show you is we can go back to. I think I'm not going to go back to the screen with the Hakdama because it's going to slow things down. It's on a different application. But in the Hakdama, what I want to argue to you today, and I think this is a very significant move that the Rambam is doing. In the Hakdama, the Rambam first tells us, I want to remind you that this author, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, put this Masechta here for a reason. And then we go back and we say, okay, what's this reason? The reason is because the Masechta is teaching us something about the leaders. It's telling us where the leaders derive their authority from. And the answer is the Messiah. And it's also telling us a second thing, which is the kind of character that's important for leaders. Whether the Rambam understands that this is the word Avos comes from, I don't know. But what the Rambam is doing over here, he's telling us, he's shifting the thought. We read Avos, typically one reads Masechtas Avos and you think about being a good guy. And like the Rambam says in Akdama to Mishnah, it's not so important for any random person to be a good guy. What's the big deal? Okay, so he'll be mazik himself. No, what's really important is that the leaders should be good people. So what the Rambam is doing over here, he's telling us to think of Masechtas Avos as something about the manhigim. And if you look a little further, to those who have the Hakdama in front of you, the Rambam says that learning Avos brings you to Nevuah. Because he quotes the Gemara in Brachas that says if you want to be a chassid, if you want to be a chassid, you should learn Avos. And he says that the higher step beyond Chasidus is Nevuah, the Ruach HaKodesh. So that means the Muslim of this Masechta bring us to Nevuah. So you could read that as like, okay, it's a great zero. Is what I'm saying. Don't underestimate the importance. But I think we have to really take the Rambam seriously. What he's saying is that this Masechta is a training for Nevuah. which puts into context the fact that puts into perspective that the Rambam is going to talk about Nevuah in Perakim of the Shemona Perakim. He's going to tell us that if someone does everything l'shem shemayim, he's going to tell us that if someone does all his actions l'shem shemayim, he's no less than a navi. He's not on a lesser level than a navi. He's going to say also in Perakim that the statement of Kol Ma'asecha Yu l'shem shemayim, that mission itself, was said b'ruach hakodesh. And in Perak Zayin, he's going to tell us that the madrigas of Nevuah, the levels of Nevuah, depend on how much a Navi perfects his character. So let's take the Rambam very seriously here when he says that this Masechta is training for Nevuah. He doesn't just mean to impress us with, okay, this is really great stuff. Don't think it's not important. He means it literally, that's how we have to understand this Masechta as the Masechta that will bring you to Nevuah. In case you don't know, the Rambam is very concerned with Nevuah as a practical matter that is at least theoretically attainable by him and by others. Okay, that's a whole different shmooze. But the point is that it's foreign for us. We don't usually think about this as being a real attainable objective. But the Rambam is telling us that, okay, this Masechta is not for simple people. It's the Masechta which is about great people, about what makes them great and why they're roy to be great, and this Masechta can bring you also to Nevuah too. So, and I want to explain this a little more. What this is, what the focus about of the Masechta being about great people. We ask some questions over here. The Rambam says two reasons for Masechta's Avos. First reason, he says that the Tanna wants to teach us the tradition, the chain of tradition. So now, the Rambam himself did that in the Hakdama to Mishnah Torah. It's on the screen. But the Rambam did a much better job. There's two major differences between the Rambam did and what Pirkei Avos did. Two major differences. One major difference is that the Rambam didn't go off on a tangent and start telling us what each of these people said. He just gave us a list. And he gave us a very, very detailed list. And then he ends up, you see the 40 people from Moshe till Rav Ashi. So it's a very detailed list. While the Tanna Masechtas Avos, which is the source of the Rambam's list, or a lot of it, and the inspiration for that structure, the Tanna Masechtas Avos says like this: Moshe kibul Torah Messina Moshe L'Shua B'Shua L'Zakenim L'Zakenim L'Neviim. Neviim L'Anshei Knesset HaGadol. Now Neviim L'Anshei Knesset HaGadol, that covers a 930-year period, if I got my math right. But anyways, it definitely covers a lot of time. While the Rambam in the Hakdama he tells us how, it's not just plain blanket statement Neviim. As you can see, he gets to Shua to Eli, to Pinchas, to Eli, to Shmuel, to David, Achiyashilan, etc., etc. Many daras of the Neviim there. So my question is, if the Mishnah in Avos is telling us something about the Messiah, the authenticity of the Messiah, for that you would need to have a chain, which is the chain that the Rambam made. How could you just say Nevi'im? It sounds like the objective of the Mishnah of Avos is something other than establishing the Messiah. Why would you just cover this period and say, one lump, come out 1,000 years, which is Nevi'im? Furthermore, the Mishnah of Avos starts telling us what these people said. Now, the Rambam says there's a second reason for Masechtas Avos. But I'm questioning, are these two reasons, two separate reasons? In other words, the agenda of Perak Aleph of Pirkei Avos is, number one, wants to take a look at the Messiah, Moshe, etc., etc. And by the way, once we get up to Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, whose works are not recorded in the Tanakh, we might as well tell you what they said because of the second objective of Masechtas Avos. To me, that's a doichik. If we're here to establish the Messiah, why in the middle do we have their statements? And ask it another way: if we didn't have a statement from one of these Tanoim, would they still be here in the Mishnayos? Because of the first reason, like there's two different things happening over here. It doesn't seem like that. But the answer is as follows. The answer is very pashut. The answer is as follows: to establish the Messiah, it's not enough to do what the Rambam did in the Akdama to Mishnah Torah. Now, going to Mishnah Torah, the Rambam said, "Here are the names." Right? I could tell you the names from Moshe and to Rav Ashi. Okay, so what? Who are these people? Why are they interesting? In other words, why, just because I know there was a person by the name of, let's say, Tzefania, why it is impressive to me that Sefania established a tradition. Oh, I'll tell you why. Because Sefania wrote a very chashuv book, and he's clearly a person that I should take seriously. Okay, fine. Say that. Now, Mizeh Antignish Isaichai, who's he? I'll tell you a little bit about him, tell you what he stood for. So, in other words, the two things that the Rambam says in the Hakdama to Pirush Mishnayos, he says two things. He says, I want to tell you about the Messiah, and I want to tell you the Musar of the Chachamim, that the Musar of the Chacham that the Chacham require. The Musar that the Chacham require is not just important for another Chacham. It's also important for the first reason. So in order to establish the Messiah, I need two different things. I need a list like the Rambam does in Akdama to Mishnah Torah. And I also need to know, why are these people interesting? Why should I take them seriously? So the Mishnah in Avos is doing the second one more than the first one. So the Mishnah in Avos says Nevi'im. You know the Nevi'im. Of course, Nevi'im are people you should trust. Of course, the Zakenim are people you should trust. So that's why the Mishnah doesn't tell us anything about them. When it gets to the people that whose works are not recorded, so it's telling us why they're worthy. So in other words, so basically what I'm saying is we need these two aspects, right? We need two different things to be happening here. We need, number one, to establish a chain, which is what the Rambam does in Akdama to Mishnah Torah. But we also need to know that the people of this chain are bar samchos, are people we should trust. By the way, the Rambam himself, we'll get to this soon. This is the Rambam. This is the sefer I mentioned last time about the sefer is called. Well, it's called something in Arabic, but it means logic. It's a work about logic, and it's Rambam's first work. And the Rambam over here writes that there are four sources of information. So I'm in the wrong chapter. Because he says like this. He says, okay, so every logical argument, you start with some premises, and then you build out from that. So what are your premises? So either your premises are muchashis, sensory perception, that you know something is black, you know something is sweet, you know something is hot. Or first principles, that the whole is greater than a part, or that 2 is an even number. Or mifursamis. Mifursamis means conventional wisdom, things that everyone just knows, such as that nudity is wrong. It's not something that we can explain, it's just accepted. And the Rambam does a lot with that in the Gabi de Eitzadas, that covering their nakedness means that they started having this kind of knowledge where they know things because they're just commonly accepted beliefs. And then Mekubalis. Not only we don't always know things directly, sometimes we know things through tradition. What does that mean? Anything that's accepted from a chassid or a group of chassidim. In order to accept a tradition, what do you need to know? You need to know that the person from whom you're accepting is in general a ne'eman. You don't have to ask for proof for every single thing he said. You listen to it by tradition, since you know in general that he's a trustworthy person. So I mean, it's obvious, but the Rambam happens to say this, that the importance, that the criteria for being a Baal Messiah, someone whose tradition we take, is that you should be a trustworthy person. So then it makes sense that the mission in Avos, establishing who these people are, and also telling us that they had Mailas HaChachamim. Okay, now it gets a little more complicated, and we'll get to this soon. Yeah, go ahead.
Just understand. So the Rebbe's bringing out that the etzim, the whole tachlis, is just to give us the Messiah, and everything they said is a hechetimtza to that, or it's taka, a book of ethics. We also gain from.
Okay, so right, so it's interesting, exactly. So notice there's a little bit of tension here, right? Because the Rambam does say it's a book of ethics, but he also makes the point that the ethics is most important for the Chachamim. So I'll tell you where this is leading, and this is where I'm going with this. That this is a book of ethics that tells us how to be Chachmei Meser. See, does that answer your question? See, it's both. It's a book of ethics. It's a book called How to Be a Tanna or How to Be a Navi. See, the Rambam says in the introduction, this book is called How to Be a Navi. Let's just take it like that. Or How to Be a Tanna, who, as I mentioned earlier, the Rambam is going to make a point in Parak Hey of the Shemona Perakim that if you do what it says in Pirkei Avos, Kol Maasecha Yud L'Shem Shemaim, in my opinion, I'm quoting the Rambam, in my opinion, you're no less than a Navi. Ein madrigase pchusa from a Navi, which is a very interesting lashon. You're not a Navi, but you're no less than a Navi. We'll talk about that one day. And the Rambam furthermore says that Mishnah was said Baruch HaKodesh. So in other words, this is not just, okay, you want to be an ethical person. This is, do you want to be an ethical person who becomes someone from whom we accept the tradition? Now, let me address something which maybe you're thinking. A minute ago, we quoted from the Sefer Milas HaGayin that we just have to establish a person's trustworthiness. That he doesn't lie. Here I'm talking about a whole different level. We're talking about what the Rambam says in the Hakdamat Mishnah is that the dayan has to be an ethical person, so he shouldn't destroy society, right? So this is not merely about being trustworthy, and there's a very simple reason for that. But this gets pretty complicated. The role of Chazal. The question that the Rambam poses, let's say in Akdama to Pirush Mishnah, is why should I listen to Chazal? Right? In other words, what makes them? What gives them an authority to do what? So there's two things: what gives them an authority, or what gives them trust? Why do I believe them? That's one question, right? The Rambam holds that Hashem told Moshe that a sukkah can't be less than 10 tvachim. Okay, Hashem told Moshe. How do I know that? Because I heard it from Rav Ashi, you heard it from Thing, and the Rambam's going to tell us the 40 generations. And I'm going to test that those 40 people, I trust them, and fine, I believe that Hashem said it to Moshe. Okay, but that's not the only role of the Chachamim. The Chachamim also generate halachas. Right? The Rambam in itself, and you remember the Rambam in the Akdama to Mishnah, he says there's two questions. Let's see the two questions. Mishpat ploini nekabel, or takonas ploini naamin. There's his judgment, there's his takonas. These are two different things. And the Rambam's answer is it's Hashem's, right? Which is a very strange answer, because his answer is, it's not his, it's Hashem's. And then he continues, he says it's mutak me'ish le'ish meshach dairis, right? It's just, so what, they're just repeating everything it says in Mishnah, is just repeating what it said to Moshe? No, that's true for halachah Moshe Sinai. But there's also takonas ploini. They made new takonas. And the Rambam's answer is, since there's a Messiah, it's Hashem speaking, not them. Now that really needs to be understood. In other words, and that's what I'm saying, there's a tension b'chlal. What exactly is the role of the Bali HaMasayra? Ram always calls them the Chachmei, the Matike HaShmua. But their job is not just to slavishly repeat and record what has been said to Moshe, such that you would say, well, all I want to do is test them for their trustworthiness and maybe their memory, right? Their job is also to generate law. Sometimes by deriving it from drushes, okay, so then I want to know if they know how to learn maybe, but sometimes they're also making new takonis. And the answer to that is somehow the Messiah. It's a very important point over there. Somehow the Messiah, it's important that Rabbi Yossi had a Messiah back to Moshe Rabbeinu for Rabbi Yossi to make a takana of kach v'kach. I don't know why we're not going to go into that for now. But that's why my point is that the ethical instructions of Avos, which the Rambam is marich in Akdama, that okay, dayanim need this, leaders need this. So first I said, oh yeah, well look, he says in Sefer Milas HaGayin, in his logic work, he says, in order to accept the Messiah, you need to know that they're trustworthy. But this is much more than that, because Avos is not only telling us they're trustworthy, Avos is telling us that they were good manhigim, and that's, I think, because we're not just looking for information, historical information. I'm not just trusting Rabbi Kiva that Hashem told Moshe kach v'kach. I'm also trusting Rabbi Kiva as an authority, and that's because he's someone who said Hakol Tzafli Varashus Nasuna, whatever he says in Mesechus Avos. Okay, is that clear? I mean, that's clear as we can hope for, and I think to begin this discussion, because it opens up questions more than it gives answers. So I just want to just veer off a little bit in something interesting here. And going back to the point that the Rambam started his introduction over here to Pirkei Avos. Here, this is the Shilat edition, if someone needs it, if you don't have the copy in front of you. That he wants to talk about what made this author put this Masech. And that's a clue to me that he wants us to think about Rebbe. So think about it like this. We have the first Perakim of Avos, and takes us from Moshe Rabbeinu till Rebbe. And then the second parak begins, Rebbe Omer. Okay. So now this makes perfect sense, because if you think about Masechtas Avos, as the Rambam tells us in the Hakdama, that it's the justification for the Messiah. So what did the Rambam do? Well, let's say, what did the Rambam himself do? When he wrote the Mishnah Torah, he says, look, I'm writing Mishnah Torah. So there's a whole Hakdama where he has to tell you where he's coming from. So he starts from Hashem to Moshe to the Gemara. He doesn't care about the Gainim so much. Nothing really happened in the times of Gainim, Ayin Sham. And I'm telling you everything that's in the Gemara and the Svarim, and I told you how we get back to Hashem, and that's why I'm writing this book. Rabbi Yehudah Nasi is doing the same thing. He's doing the exact same thing that the Rambam did in Akdama to Pishup Mishnayos. He, Rebbe, the author of Mishnayos, is giving you what you need to know to think about, why should I trust Mishnayos? Or why should I trust Rebbe? Who's Rebbe? Oh, so Rebbe says, I'll tell you who I am. Till I get to the last one over there, right? Okay, and then Rebbe, and then his son says, right? The last Mishnah Perakim al Shemona Gamliel. And Rebbe Omer, because this is his introduction to his own book. So that's why I think the Rambam is pointing to Rebbe in the first line over here, because he's telling us that if you want to understand Pirkei Avos, you have to think about what does it take to be a Tanna, or maybe even to be a Navi. And maybe those two things are not so different as we think they are, because the Tanna sometimes right with HaKodesh, as we mentioned a few times. That's in Perakim. So I think that's what Rambam's doing over here. He's telling us that that he's alluding to us anyways, and I'll soon talk about why it's an illusion. Rambam always does illusions, but there's something that the Rambam hid over here, and it's very, very interesting. It's very interesting. But the Rambam's telling us, alluding to us, to think about that that what we're learning in this Masechta is basically how to be worthy, at least, of being part of the Messiah. Right? How can you too become a Tanna, basically? And just, I don't know if this is like a vertical, I'm not sure. But Rebbe in Perek Beis, what does Rebbe say? He says, fine. And he ends off, so I wonder if that's a remez to the fact that this is his Hakdama, his justification for writing his book. It was a question of whether he wrote the Mishnah or he authored the Mishnah, didn't write it, but either way, he's telling us something about creating books. Okay, so now let's think about this. Okay, the Rambam says further here. We have the Shilat one, but you can look at the other one. The Rambam says the following. He says, before I start the Pirush of Avos, I'm going to give you some Perakim that are going to serve as a mafteach for what we're going to get to, and you should know V'da. Okay, he says the things that I'm going to tell you in these Perakim are not things that I were machadish. Rather, they come from the Chachamim, Midrashim B'Talmud, and from the philosophers, the early ones and the later ones. And you should listen to the truth from whoever said it. Sometimes I'm going to bring a complete memra, which is the lashon of a known book, and that's okay. That's okay, because I'm not claiming that I'm the one who said it. I'm just quoting other people. I'm not going to mention their names because whatever the reason is. Okay, so let me tell you who this is. There's one person in particular that the Rambam has in mind when he talks about taking it word for word, and he doesn't want to tell you who it is. And that's a fellow by the name of al-Farabi. He was a Muslim philosopher. Do I have here? Here we go. A Muslim philosopher that the Rambam said about him. This is a letter to Shmuel ibn Tibon, the translator of the Moreh Nevuchim. And one of the things that Shmuel asked the Rambam is, which books does he need to learn in order to understand the background of the Moreh? So he says, only study Aristotle. Okay. And then he tells him which Mefarshim you should use. And I want to tell you in general, Loitis Asik Pacific Malach Zagon Chiber Hachacham Abu Natz al-Farabi. The only ones who you should study about logic is al-Farabi. Ki kol ma shechiber bichlal ubefrat sefer Hakol Sodos Nikia. So the Rambam gives us haskama, as a haskama from the Rambam, that it's al-Farabi, every single thing that al-Farabi said, especially his whatever first principles, is all perfect. Also, this other guy, whatever, some other people, but al-Farabi is the best. Okay, this is the haskama the Rambam gave to this fellow al-Farabi, and al-Farabi wrote a book called, Rambam wrote this book called Shemona Perakim, and there's a word Perak, whatever it is in Arabic. That same word, al-Farabi wrote a book called Perakim, the same word in Arabic, of the statesman, of the politician. And that book, there are passages in the Shemona Perakim that are lifted mamish mila b'mila. When the Rambam says, there are passages, when the Rambam says, I'm going to say things, and I'm quoting other chacham and philosophers, early and later ones, and some of the things I'm saying are mila b'mila. That's here. That's talking about al-Farabi. And you can find it. And of course, then it becomes very interesting. So first of all, you have to understand, if the Rambam says al-Farabi is Sodos Nikia and everything he says is amazing, then you should learn him. And meaning to say, if you want to understand the Rambam, that's a great source to learn. Now, the Rambam doesn't tell you you have to learn him in order to understand Shemona Perakim. And I'm not saying you do have to learn him in order to understand Shemona Perakim. But if you want to see, when you have Shverkeit in Shemona Perakim, you look at al-Farabi, or you see the things that the Rambam changed, and we're going to get to soon, things become very, very interesting. Because as I mentioned, well, al-Farabi wrote a book which is called the Perakim of the politician, of the statesman. And he says, furthermore, the Olam knows a little bit of Shemona Perakim. The Rambam says in Shemona Perakim that person who knows how to balance your midas, person who knows the whole secret of the halamutza, and he could train people, he's the chacham, the wise man. He's a wise man. Okay, that's somewhere later here. Fine. The wise man, he says. There's also, if a person has a problem with his midas, you should go to the wise man. Al-Farabi says that the person who knows the derech hamamutza is the king or the statesman. Why? Because he knows how to make laws. What are you trying to achieve when you make laws? Well, you're trying to train people, says al-Farabi. You're trying to train people to be good. So if you want to train people to be good, you have to know what true goodness is, first of all, and you also have to know psychology. How do people become good? Which is what the whole business of training midas is about. Now, by the way, al-Farabi is not the one who started this whole shmooze. It really comes from Aristotle. Al-Farabi channels or is a farish Aristotle, but the Rambam himself in that letter says study Aristotle, but study with the Mefarshim, and the Mefarshim al-Farabi. Aristotle wrote a book called Ethics, and al-Farabi says, al-Farabi zok beferish, that you want to know what the book of ethics is, it's a book of laws. It's a book of laws. And as if you read ethics, if you look at the book of ethics, it sounds a lot like Shemona Perakim. There's this midah, there's that midah, and this is an extreme, and you have to get to the mean and don't go to the extreme. All that Torah comes from Aristotle, derech al-Farabi, that the Rambam learned that from him. And he says it's a book of laws. In other words, it teaches you how to make a law, right? What's a law? A law is a behavior that people are going to engage in. And, says al-Farabi, ultimately the purpose is that they should become good people. So now the Rambam always talks about midas, not in the Shemona Perakim, in Hilchos Deis, he doesn't say this is the teaching necessary for someone to be a statesman, a politician, a king. He says this is the teaching to be a chacham. Okay? So what's going on over here? Why does the Rambam, here's my question, why does the Rambam reframe this whole shmooze to be not about law, but to be about just some other subject, ethics, kishalatzmi? Now, the answer is very pashut if you think about it, because we have a law. And that law is the Torah. What do you mean law? What do you mean you have to learn how to be a statesman? You have to learn how to make law? What do you have to do that for? You have the Torah. Now, al-Farabi said, look, you want to make laws, you want to be a statesman, it means you want to be a king, you want to be a legislator. So you have to be taught. So what should you study? You should study ethics. understand what does it mean for a person to be virtuous, what's a good person, and has a person become good, and then you should make laws to match. We don't need to do that. And this the Rambam says also. This is how the Rambam ends his book of logic. Hamada Hamadini, he's talking about the various branches of knowledge. So this is political knowledge, Medini, relating to the country. But rather, we could say political knowledge, not necessarily the country. Political knowledge. The first one is how a person should manage himself, because self-management is also a form of politics, like you're ruling over yourself. Second one is how a person manages his household. The third one is how you manage a city. And the fourth one is how you manage a great nation. So what does it mean for a person to manage himself, to have good midas? Okay, and that's a big focus of Shemona Perakim. Okay, self-management. What does it mean to manage your household? So he goes through that, fine. What about to manage a city? That's the science that will teach, that helps people know what's the true happiness and tells them how to get there and what's true suffering. Okay, and training them. And will also give them laws. And there were sages of the nations would make all sorts of laws to guide their sheep, their nations. And philosophers have a lot of books about this. We don't need political science that's going to tell us what makes a good law. What do we have to know what makes a good law for? We have a divine law, right? So the Rambam, unlike al-Farabi, now what's al-Farabi shita about this? He also has a divine law, which is Muslim Islamic law. That shouldn't concern us over here. It's not really interesting. Only if you want to see ma bein Rambam of al-Farabi. Doesn't really matter for now. The Rambam is basically saying that we have the Torah. We don't need to learn, right? This whole branch of science. Yeah, I'm just putting that away. If someone wants to bring it back up in case someone wants to look at it still. The whole branch of science of what makes a law a good law, and what are we aiming for with the law, and how should we design the law to achieve our goal, became obsolete because we have the divine law. So imagine the Rambam's going to tell you like this. You know what Pirkei Avos is teaching you? It's teaching you how to be a legislator. What do you mean how to be a legislator? This is a Torah. Now, this whole question is a much broader question, which, again, I want to just touch on this. I'm not going to go into it by Riches because it opens up to a lot of things. People that say, oh, we don't need midas. We don't need midas. We have halachah. Right? That's an extreme version of this. Not only, in other words, it's not even so pashut that we need to learn about midas even for our self-management. What do I have to know midas for? Let me learn hilchos v'ahavta l'reich kamocha. Let me learn hilchos l'sikum l'sita, hilchos v'ahavta l'reich kamocha, and hilchos hashavas aved, and v'chudu v'chudu. Hilchos l'segzil, and let that be sufficient. Or another way to ask that question is the Rambam is going to say in Shemona Perakim that the Torah itself guides us to have good midas through training. Because the Rambam's big side, probably everyone knows that how do you attain good character? Through actions. By doing actions by doing actions, you become a good person. By doing the right kinds of actions, your character is changed, your soul gets changed, and then it becomes natural for you to do good. And the Torah prescribes the good actions, the balanced actions, that then make you into a good person. See, because as al-Farabi said, a good law is a law that's designed for the end of changing people and making them into good people. Okay, well, that was done. Moshe did that already. Maybe not just Moshe, maybe also the Yeshua and the Tanoim, and maybe you could even throw in the Amirim. But at this point, we have that already. So why do I have to know all this Torah? The Torah is Hamidus. Okay? That's a very, very important question. But here's what I want to get to, what the Rambam's doing over here. The answer that the Rambam's getting at is that as subjects of the law, as people who follow the Torah merely, you don't need midas. You don't need Torah Hamidus. In other words, yes, the real Torah Hamidus, the purpose of Torah Hamidus is to know how to legislate. Okay? So what if you're a legislator? What if you're a Tanna who claims to have mishpatim that are divine? Well, then you better know what the objective of the Torah is. See, the Rambam is going to tell us in Parak Daled that the objective of the Torah is to make us into good people. And therefore, people who think that they have to do more than the Torah says, making a mistake. Because the Torah itself is making you into a good person. Now, think about that. When the Rambam says you shouldn't do more than the Torah says, he says explicitly, it doesn't mean more than the Torah says, rather you have to do Rabbanans also. Because he says the Torah, the purpose of the Torah is to make us into good people, plus Chazal added things that are necessary. So now, oh wait, Chazal. How did Chazal add things that are necessary? Only because they understood the purpose of the Torah themselves. So there is, in a certain sense, then, the purpose of studying, of knowing the idea behind the Torah, the purpose of the Torah, the purpose of that is if you yourself want to generate Torah, meaning if you want to be a Tanna, or what if you want to be a Navi? Nevi'im could sometimes change the Torah, and the Rambam is going to address that in Shemona Perakim. He's going to tell us, oh, if you do call Masech in the same parak, if you do call Masech Legislator Shemayim, then you could sometimes bend the law. Afilu Devar Avera, he quotes the Chazal. If you're a kol masech l'shem shemayim person, then you could sometimes do a hayra shah. And don't think this is not a small thing. The Rambam himself relied on this for writing the Moreh Nevuchim. He says Reb Sadigan relied on this for an innovation that the Rambam wrote Moreh Nevuchim, even though he's doing Megalasidus. The point is that the idea that we need people who are capable of representing the Messiah, of representing God's word back to Moshe, because they are people that are on the same ethical level that makes them worthy of being transmitters of this Messiah. That's not something that's no longer relevant. In a certain sense, you say it's no longer relevant because we have Tzivuyim Malakim. But for Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, it's not irrelevant. For all the Tanoim, it's not irrelevant. They're the ones who made the Tzivuyim Malakim, right? Remember the Rambam said in the Hakdama to the Mishnah is that Mishpat Lelekimhu, that Rabbi Yehudah Nasi makes a takana, and someone makes a gzera or a drush, and they could say that's divine. That has to be understood. I'm putting a question mark there. But Tzivuyim Malakim doesn't just mean Hashem said to Moshe. It means if you're someone on this level, that Pirkei Avos tells us the level that the Baalei Messiah have to be on, then your tzivuyim are also tzivuyim malakim. So my point is like this. So let's just wrap up the ikar point of here. Like I said, this discussion opens up many more questions, maybe than it answers, as is often the case when you reach some ayimik. Even for me, and I know a lot of the answers of what we have to explore still, it still opens up a lot of questions. Certainly for people that are just hearing this kind of thing for the first time, I'm sure there's tons of questions. But let me just get to the key point I'm saying is that the Rambam is telling us in the Hakdama that instead of looking at Pirkei Avos as the popular sefer, basically, I mean, I don't know if he thought about that, but people tend to think of Pirkei Avos as a popular sefer and everyone can read it. Rambam's telling us this is a sefer of Chachamim, and not stam a sefer of Chachamim, a sefer of the greatest Chachamim, who their mishpat is mishpat alaki. In that sense, then, the Rambam could have maybe said explicitly, like al-Farabi says, that we're learning how to be legislators. But he doesn't quite want to say that because we're not encouraging everyone to start changing the law. Even though, remember, Chazal could change the law. At least they could add to it, whatever. I'm not saying they could do a Rosh Hashanah, they could do Takonis, they could do Gzeris, they could do all these things. Does the Rambam want us to do that? Well, yeah, he wants us to become Nevi'im. That's what he says. He says we're going to become Nevi'im if we learn this. But he's not being so explicit about it because Saif, this whole body of wisdom, which, as I mentioned, in a certain sense, it operates in a whole world that's parallel to the Torah. Because, you tell me to be a mensch, you tell me to listen to halachah. Which one? What's going on over here? That's the tension over here. This whole body of wisdom, the Rambam is not telling us that, he's not going to tell us, okay, here's how to make halachah. Because, what do you mean? We have halachah already. But he's alluding to it. He's been meramis to that. And like I said, if you know where he's coming from, you look back at al-Farabi, see a little bit where this is coming back to. So basically, the point is like this. The point is for Avos, and really it's about Dvarim Pshutim. Dvarim Pshutim meaning it's Mefurish in the Rambam. That Avos, he says in Agdama to Mishnayos, is telling us who these Tanaim were. So what I'm saying is that on a deeper level, that means is that Avos teaches us how to be a Tanna, or as the Rambam himself says, teach us how to be a Navi. The end game of this limud is to attain some level that we actually don't have. And from our perspective today, or whatever, till we learn Avos and become Nevi'im, we would say, like the Rambam says in the Milas HaGoyim, we don't need to know how to make law because we're just listening to the law. But what if we're going to become some people who can tap in and be part of this tzibur alaki? That's when we really need. That's when we really need Avos. Okay, now let's take some questions.
The only reason it's coming out, the only reason to have good midas is only taka mitzad being a manig or being a navi.
So here's the thing, right? So if you look at Milas HaGoyim, he divides it in two. He says the first thing of he talks about political science. He says the first part of it is how to be manig yourself. Okay? The next part is to be manig your household. The next part is to be manig Medina. And for that, you have to know what's the true happiness. Okay. And how to train people's midas to attain that. And make laws too. And all these things, the philosophers had books. Now, these days, says the Rambam, we don't need them anymore. Kaloimar, what don't we need anymore? Hanhogas v'hachukim. So you have to figure out exactly what those two things are referring to. Two things we don't need anymore on Haggis and Chukim. You have to go back and see what's on Haggis, what's Chukim. But he's not saying, he's Lahedya not saying that we don't need Midas anymore. Because that's the first thing. On Haggis al Nafsha. You do. So... You do, but like he says in the introduction, it's not really that important for a person to have Midas. What's really important is the person to have Midas who's going to be controlling other people. Right?
So what's takab shat? What's the matter of having Midas? What's takab shat?
Yeah, okay, so we have to go into that. I mean, well, yeah, what you're asking is the bigger question of what's the Rambam's whole derech hamamutza. What's that about? What's that achieving?
If we're just saying now that the whole tachlis is to be a manig or to be a navi, saying you can learn up the whole of this that it's a book on how to be a navi. And the Mela, for me, this is just for that. It takes away a lot of the te'elos and having good midas.
No, well, yes and no. I mean, as the Rambam says in the Akdama, if one person has bad midas, it's not the end of the world. It's still better to have them have good midas than not. But the reason why there's this safer is because we're trying to tell people more than that, okay? In other words, let's say people couldn't be Tanoim / Nevi'im. Would there still be the safer because of the first? Maybe. It would be structured differently. We wouldn't have this whole mix of telling us the Bali Messiah plus the Midas, right? We wouldn't have that all together.
Meaning what?
Again, the way the Rambam phrases in the Midas HaGoyim, of course it is a good for a person to have good Midas, even if he's not going to be a legislator. Okay? So fine. But the ultimate purpose is to make laws, and I showed you, al-Farabi says his book is a book of laws. Pirkei Avos puts together two things, Midas and those people who legislated and can claim that their word is the word of God, even when it's not part of the Messiah. Somehow the fact that they're part of the Messiah makes the Takanas and Xeris also godly, right? Also divine. So Pirkei Avos is teaching you the higher level of Midas. As the Rambam notes in the Akdama, it starts with Hevel Musun Bedin. Right? I'm not the only one probably. I learned Pirkei Avos as a kid, and a shtickle letdown that the first thing they tell you is how to be a dying. Like, okay, you tell me something that's negate. But the Rambam is saying, no. Actually, Pirkei Avos was written for the leaders. See, so it doesn't mean there's no purpose in having Midas. But the highest purpose and the way Pirkei Avos is structured, and probably not just that Mishnah, but probably overall the structure of Parak Aleph that mixes together the Bali Masur and their good midas, I maintain, is telling you why these people were Tanoim. And what does it take to be a Tanna? What does it take to be a Manik?
The only Nakuda I'm not understanding so clear is, meaning, it seems to be coming out that in if someone is not cut out to be someone who's he's not cut out to be a navi or the manig in Klal Yisrael, and don't spend time working on your midas. Spend time on others.
That's not true. That's not true because it's good to have midas. It's good to have good midas for whatever reason. What the Rambam said over here, look what he says. See? It is a hezek to have bad midas, whatever the hezek may be. But it's not going to destroy the world.
Sorry, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah. Who's speaking?
Rami Lax. How are you?
Hi, Rami. Oh, yeah, I just don't see him.
So, sorry.
Yeah, gotcha. Now
I mean, I don't know that I was following that. Meaning, following from the fact that Avos is written as, to some extent, whatever we call a higher level, to the point of it's supposed to educate the leaders, right? Does not detract from its ability for the standard person to gain from it, right? Meaning, it even though it's written for a leader, it's still, you could say some of it's a little bit esoteric, some of it's not so nogea, etc. But it's still outlining a lechatchila version of midos. So whether or not all of it is nogea to us and every single step mispara has to make sense, meaning we have to really jump on all of that train, that doesn't mean that even as a construct, it's not helpful to us.
100%. Could not agree more. Exactly.
So it doesn't have to really be, it's not one or the other.
Correct, right. But in order to fully understand the nature of the book, how it's written, you have to see it as Rambam makes in the Hagdama, and I've been arguing, you have to understand that the fullest realization of good midas is to be at least a Tanna, if not another.
It really just depends on your angle. Meaning if you're coming at it to try to get at, hey, what is the essential purpose of Avos, and learning Perish Rambam on it, what are we doing here? So to fully appreciate what's going on, you'd have to appreciate what the Rambam's trying to tell us. But to learn Avos and to appreciate the Masechta does not mean that you have to know that.
Exactly. Only to explain it fully. Right. There's a lot you can learn. You can learn it without knowing this, and you can gain from it. And you might have some questions. Like you might have that question of why are these two things mixed together, the Messiah and the Midas, if this is just a good ethical work, right? That question. But 100%, it can do a lot for you. And again, just to repeat what the Rambam says here on the screen, it's certainly helpful for an individual to have good Midas. But besides for being helpful for an individual, for a manig, it's crucial, and actually it's what makes you not stam a manig, but a navi, who is the highest manig in the Rambam's understanding of Anhaga. The highest manig is the navi.
Sorry, so just in short, means if the Rav is going to answer, where does the Rambam, where are we getting that the Rambam saying this is just for Nevi'im, not for the Hamoinam?
No, but that's not, again, as Avrami said, we're not saying it's not for the Hamoinam. We're saying that if you do this fully, you'll be a navi.
And we're getting that.
Which would make sense why, if you're learning Mesechus Avos, there's no reason to necessarily go in order unless you're trying to be a Navi. There's no Seder to Mesechus Avos necessarily.
And why, if you're trying to be a Navi, would you go in order?
Because you're working back on the chain of Messiah. You're working back.
Oh, I see. No. But the becoming a Navi through Mesechus Avos is because we'll have to talk about this one day. Is because you need to perfect your character to be a Navi. It's not because of the Messiah. It's not because
even if you wouldn't. Sorry, even if you wouldn't say that, you still could make the argument that it would make sense to learn it in order. Meaning, though it could be that not each step is needed for the regular person, that doesn't mean that there is still not what to be gained from learning it in that order.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, probably true. There's only what to be learned from that. Yeah, from the order, I'm sure.
And also this part that we're saying that to be a Navi or a Manig, it would apply even on a smaller scale also, no? Meaning to be a Mechana, to be a, when you're going to make Hanas in any sort of way.
Yes, in other words, I'm taking, you see, going back to that Rambam, when he says, if a person, I'm Aretz is not a Bamusa, it doesn't harm the tzibur, it harms himself. But if a person is a public person, let's read that again, a shayfet, if he's not a Bamusa or chenik, he's in big trouble, right? That's not, as you're saying, that's not only if you're a Tanna or a Navi, right? That's if you have any power over anyone. The more power a person has, the more important that he should be a Baal Musar and a Baal Chinuch. That's 100%. That's Mefurish in the Rambam. What I'm saying is I'm extending that and saying, look, Perakim Avos is telling us not merely, right, by putting everything together. The Rambam, again, just to review, the Rambam says two things. It wants to tell us about the Messiah, and it wants to tell us good midas that Dayanim need. So I'm saying, well, if those two things go together, as I believe I've shown that they do, that means that, okay, a Dayan needs these things. But if you want to be a Tanna who can say Mishpat Lelekimhu, and that what I'm doing is divine law, then you really have to know the purpose of the Torah, which is to give us good midas. Rambam says. You see, meaning in the midas Hayagoyin, he says that the training to make law is to know good midas and how to engender them among people. That's what he says, which is consistent with what he says in Shemona Perakim, that that's the purpose of the Torah. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu or Hashem, whatever you want to say, whoever made the Torah, I'm saying the purpose of the Torah is like the purpose of all law. Rambam says explicitly, the purpose of the Torah is to train people. It's very important to know. The Rambam understands the purpose of the Torah is to train people. In what? To be good people. So now, theoretically, as the Rambam says in the Midas Hayagoyin, we could talk to anyone about political science and say, you want to know how to make laws? Well, don't you want to make people good? Yes. Okay, so what does it take to make people good? Moshe Rabbeinu did it the best. So now we're done. Okay? But what do you mean now we're done? The Rambam is going to say before Shemona Perakim that what trains us to be good people is not just Torah Shem Ksav, we're not Karoim, we do Torah Shem Lapel also. So when you say we have a perfect Torah, you mean Moshe Kibul Torah Mesinai, that's a perfect Torah. So that's why I'm putting it together and saying, yeah, in order to say Mishpat Lekimhu, in order to say, well, I'm doing a perfect Torah, you have to know the purpose of the Torah, you have to know how legislation works, as he says in the Midas Hayagoyin. And that's because you study political science, and you know, what we're trying to do is make people into good people, and here's how. And for some reason, the Chazal needed to change the Torah. That's an important question. Why did Chazal need to change the Torah? But apparently they did. See, so it's 100% that number one, a regular person can have good midas. Number two, anyone who has power, it's more important that they should have good midas, as Rambam says. But what I see is that the spitz of that is to be able to say Mishpat Lelekimhu, because you have good midas and you understand the whole Torah project.
I'm getting a little bit confused. I'm just trying to understand. I'm trying to get the frame of what's being said over here. Just clear. The reason why we don't need Avos is because we'd get good midas just from following the Torah.
That's a problem. That's a question which I didn't answer.
Oh, I thought we were saying in Chanami that from following the Torah you'll get good midas, but Avos is taka if you want to legislate Torah.
Yeah, but that's not the only answer. That's not the only answer, because Rambam says very clearly that Avos teaches you midas.
Right.
And 1 second, right? And in Midas Hayagoyin, he also says that you only don't need to learn how to legislate, but you still need to learn midas, right? He says we have the Torah, so we don't need to learn how to make law.
Right. So I'm trying to understand, like, what's Torah? What's Avos teaching us?
Right. Yes. I hope that wasn't confusing. When I said that question of why do we even need midas if we have Torah, I just meant to bring out that there is an inherent tension between these two chachmas. One is Gemara, Shulchan Aruch, and the other one is midas. There's an inherent tension. Some people could argue, the Rambam doesn't hold like this, and we'll have to think about why. It's an open question, why not? Some people could argue, I don't need good midas because I follow halachah. And people do hold it. People have said that. Other people might say, I'll get good midas by following halachah. Those are two good arguments, which I didn't respond to today. I just was trying to bring out that there's actually a very strong tension between learning Shemona Perakim and learning the rest of Kol Torah Kula. Okay? I just wanted to bracket that. There's even a greater tension if you use Shemona Perakim as a model, for an inspiration for how to design law, which is what al-Farabi did, and the Rambam in the Midas Hayagoyin says is the ultimate of ethical knowledge, is that you can make law. Then you say, whoa, I'm not making law anymore. Right? I don't need to make law anymore. So the first 2 points is that we don't even need midas because we follow the law, or because we the law will change us. I was just bringing that up to show that there's a tension. I'm not answering those questions. But the third level of, well, we don't have to make laws anymore. So why do I have to know political science? Why do I have to know how to train people through legislation? Rambam says you taka don't because you have the Torah. So that level, on that level, the Rambam acknowledges that there is a contradiction, a tension between Chochmas Hamidus and Chochmas HaTorah. That Chochmas HaTorah made Chochmas Hamidus obsolete, at least for using Chochmas Hamidus to generate laws. Okay, and but that I'm saying at the same time there are allusions in the Shemona Perakim that maybe you do want to be a Tanna, maybe after Taki you want to be a legislator, maybe you want to be a Navi who could tweak the law. So beseder, so you do. So in other words, even though the Rambam, the kids when it's things like this, when the Rambam says Milsai Goyin, you don't have to make law because you follow divine law. Well, what if I want to be divine? Oh, okay, then you have to know how to make law, and that's what he says in the Shemona Perakim. You want to be a Navi, you have to know this. Now I'm just saying, why isn't he saying Mefurish? Because what? You're telling us you're going to tell us we could change the law. He doesn't want to talk about such things. Mefurish. You're telling me I could be a legislator. Mefurish, what he says in Milsai Goyin, we don't need to make laws anymore. A Navi could change the law. A Navi could do Harashah. A Navi could tell you to go to Muhammad, right? A Navi could do things that as Rambam says in the Legislator. A Navi could change the law. A Navi could also tell you to do things that the law doesn't tell you one way or the other, which means he can generate a law for Lashah. So of course a Navi has to learn. And of course a Navi has to know, that Chachma. By the way, if everyone's thinking, Navi doesn't have to know anything because the Navi Hashem talks to him, you have to understand the Rambam's Torah and Nevuah. It's not like that. A Navi has to start with great Chachma, and then the Nevuah comes. So that's what I'm saying. So then there's, you see right there, we could just show you a stira. The Rambam says in Milsai Goyin that you don't need to know political science, which is what? Which is how to make laws based on ethics, based on the agenda of ethics. You don't have to know that because you have to see you're lucky. So then I could ask, well, doesn't he tell me in Pirkei Avos that I might become a Navi? So wouldn't I be the one who makes it Tzivur lucky if I know Pirkei Avos? And the answer is yes. And Taki, you're right, because Pirkei Avos is Gufa political science, and it was written by the people who were the Elakim. And in fact, some of its statements are divine, as Rambam said. That's why he says that. So you see how it comes together?
Yeah, but are we giving an answer for what does Avos teach you different than what the Torah gives you? That's for giving over law as opposed to just being a Balmidas?
Again, what's the question?
That Avos Torah, even Torah will make you into Balmidas if you follow, like the Rambam says, by following the Maisi Mitzvahs, doing those actions will make you into a Balmidas.
Right.
But Avos gives you something more than that if you want to legislate law.
Right.
Why? What about Avos is giving you different than the Torah gives you? What aspect of Avos?
Well, no. So again, if you want to make a new law, you better understand Kavanas HaTorah.
Meaning what? Wouldn't I be Masuna Badin just from following the Torah? Will Mela become Masuna Badin?
No, because Masuna. No, see, okay, Masuna Badin was part of the Torah. That's a mistake you're making. Why are you looking at Torah Shabbat? It's Torah Shabbat also.
Oh, so what? Meaning what? So what am I missing? So what are we getting from Avos? What's Avos teaching us more than? So meaning what? So Avos itself is the Torah. I'm following the Torah.
Right. No, Avos itself. Right. No. 1 second. Well, you're getting very confused over here. The Torah says, let's say, do din. Okay, fine. The Torah says, the Rambam in Shemona Perakim, the Kavanas HaTorah is that the Torah is supposed to give a person good midas. Okay? Now, imagine two people. One person knows that that's the Kavanas HaTorah, and he knows how the Torah achieves that. Another person does not know either that's what the Torah's purpose is, or he doesn't know how the Torah gets us there. Okay? The first person, the one who understands that, is also capable of making new halachas and takanas and gzeres as necessary. Now, you might ask a question, well, why is it necessary? Isn't the Torah perfect? That's a good kasha. It's Tama kasha. How does the Rambam be marich ma'od how perfect the Torah is, and then Chazal come and have to add things? But the answer to that is, when we talk about how perfect the Torah is, that includes Chazal and their takanas. Yeah, you may have a technical question. Was it not perfect before they made that takana? So, how do we say that? Fine. But you have to bracket that question, leave that question. When the Torah is perfect, it's including the Rabbanans. And when I say today, let's say, when you say today, me and you today, if we keep the Torah, it's going to perfect us. That doesn't mean because we're keeping the Torah before we keep us takanas, before the Tanna. That's because we're keeping it with the takanas at Tanna. Before the Tanna made the Takanas, they also kept the Torah made perfect without those Gzeres. So apparently things changed, and it was necessary to add or to change things, right? So far, so good? Okay. The ability of the Tanoim to add to the Torah is contingent on them understanding the mechanics of the Torah. So you need to understand Shemona Perakim, which teaches you what does it mean to have good midas, how are the good midas engendered, how the Maaseh Torah engender the good midas. You have to understand that mostly, or the person who needs that most is the one who wants to continue the Torah project, meaning generating Torah. Let's say Rabbi Gershom said you shouldn't marry two wives. How did Rabbi Gershom know what's right? Because he learned Shemona Perakim. He knew that the Torah is trying to do X, Y, Z, and here's how. And he knew that in these days we have to change the halachah. I don't know, whatever. Rabbi Gershom Stakon maybe that example. Maybe it's not part of the Torah. Maybe it's only local, but the Ram holds it at that. Whatever. But I mean, Tanna. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just jump in with one quick question?
Yeah, for sure.
Not related to the handle just now, but the Rambam seems to put Ruach HaKodesh and Nevuah as the same thing. How does Ruach HaKodesh work?
Yeah, we'll have to get to that, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, as Kasha, the Rambam holds that in order to perfect the midah, you have to go the other way, the other extreme. Someone following the Torah l'chayra will not come out that way then.
Why not?
Because the Torah doesn't tell you to go to the other extreme.
Oh, right. Okay, but now you're having a different question, right? So your point is that the Torah is not sufficient. That's you say. How can I say the Torah is sufficient?
Hey, how the Torah is not going to perfect my midas because if I'm an anav, I'm not. It's not telling me to live as a balgaiva for a little bit.
Right, but there's a deeper problem. How do you ever become an anav if you're following the Torah? See, if the Torah makes a person perfect, then why do you ever deviate and go the other way?
I start off in a bad. I start.
You didn't have the mechanech. Your parents didn't make you shake lulav when you were 6. What do you mean? Chinuch. No, this is something Rambam addresses, by the way. How did it ever go wrong? What went wrong? Not pashut.
You don't start off with tchunis rice.
No, Rambam was very anti that. You start off with nitiyas, whatever. We'll have to. You're asking a good question. You're asking a good question, a very good question, and we have to deal with that when we get there at some point. And of course, there's an answer. You're right. That might be the answer. No, when I was like I said before, there's I think 3 ways you can posit the contradiction between Torah and Chachmas Hamidus. Number 1, why do I have to be a mensch? Can't I just follow halacha and do everything I need to do? Number 2, halacha will make me into a mensch. Rambam says that. And number 3, I have to understand what the kavanas of Torah is and what it's working for. I'm not making Torah. And as I said before, the third one, the Rambam Taka says, Mefurish, that you know what? If you're not making Torah, if you're just following Tzivuyim Alakim, you don't have to understand the political science of the Torah. The first 2, I'm just leaving it as an open question, just to show you that there's a stira. But of course, there has to be an answer, because yes, the Rambam holds you do need to know Chachmas Hamidus, despite the Torah. You're right. There is an answer. There is an answer. I'm not saying there's no answer. And maybe the answer may have to do with what you said also, that there's some. Rambam says that, I think in Perakim that basically human beings are not stable. So like the Torah can only do so much or something like that. No, I mean, it's a little schwer, because if the Torah is doing that, it's like, okay, so the Torah not doing such a good job, like, well, so there's something strange about that, right? You see, there's a little bit of a problem. That is the kavanas of Torah. That's the kavanas of Torah. But now you tell me, but you should know Torah doesn't work, so we're going to supplement it with our own work. Okay, it's interesting. It's pretty interesting.
I mean, unless you understand it as like if you're on Torah completely, then you can possibly reach the same point. But this is more, and maybe I'm crazy for saying this, but this is more like it's a cheat code. It's more of a thesis statement, laying it out. Meaning, if you learn Torah, no one's saying that you wouldn't get to the same place. But the learning Torah would get you through the same place through an experiential journey rather than laying out the knowledge so you can see it written. Avos is more of, you might learn Avos and know every word it's saying and still not be Mekayim that point that you should be to be a dayan. And someone who learns the Torah could not know, the reverse.
Right.
Could not know all this and possibly have evolved to that point.
Right. So I think what you're saying is if you understand objective of the Torah, and then you learn Torah, then it's more likely to work, at least quicker, than if you just say, well, I'm going to do Torah, it's going to work on me, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm really saying the access to different ways, but I don't want to say that you can learn Avos and not really know Torah and get there. So I'm stuck combining, you're really stuck combining the two and just saying it's experiential versus.
Okay, right. No, you just raised a very interesting point, right? Meaning, in as much as the Rambam is going to say, which he does, that I think maybe kol kavanos haTorah is to lead us to this to the medium, to this golden mean. Then so why do I need the Torah for that, right? Meaning the question goes both ways. Why do I need midas if I have the Torah, and why do I need the Torah if I have midas? So how do the two things work together is an important question. The best way that they work. See, the best way that they work together is my way. Is well, what if you want to be a Tanna? What if you want to make Torah? Then, yeah, you want to make laws, right? That's the best.
Okay, but then you very much put it in like this, like you very much like sequester into like this, like very hard to reach. Like it makes sense.
Who said it's hard to reach? Whoa! Who said it's hard to reach?
No. Let me take it back. I don't mean it's hard to reach. What I mean to say is that you very much made Avos like this, like very. We have a bunch of Masechtas, right, Baruch Hashem, and then you took Avos and you said, though it's not explicitly stated anywhere in Avos, really Avos is written for this. But like if we would have written maybe for, I guess also like if we would have written that, no one else would have learned it. Like so, say it in the first Mishnah. Say, by the way, hey guys, maybe try learning this, but like really, this is for these people.
No, it's for you. It's for you to become a Navi. Why are you assuming you're not becoming a Navi? Why are you giving up so fast?
I'm not. I'm just saying for everyone else.
Oh, you're not giving up. Okay. No, I don't know. And by the way, I mean, it's not an all or nothing proposition. You could become partial. You can get there. You can get. And someone raised before. What's the is that a partial nevuah?
Also be talmidim of Nevi'im and followers of Nevi'im.
Very good, right? If you understand what the Nevi'im are doing, then you can be b'nei Nevi'im. The Rambam talks about the b'nei Nevi'im
and accept and learn the Torah. But
to understand what the Nevi'im are getting at,
even to be makabel that, we need a certain level.
You have to understand where the Nevi'im are coming from. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Nevuah in the Rambam is not this far out thing that we just close the door on and put it in a black box. It's right there. It's right there that either it's accessible or, like Mikey's saying, the brachas that we're relating to it, and we want to know what the Nevi'im are doing, what they're about. Today that we should learn from it. Now, like the Rambam says about the Bnei HaNevi'im, they're training, and eventually they should become Nevi'im. If not, okay, such their training. So Talmidei HaNevi'im should also understand the Nevi'im.
So through learning the Shemona Perakim, if someone becomes a master of Shemona Perakim, he should be able to take any mitzvah and explain why that makes you into a better Bal Midas?
Yes. Yeah, you have to learn the Rimar Nevuchim also, the Rambam does this. But yeah, that's exactly, yeah. This fits into Rambam's bigger project of Tamei mitzvahs, and then all mitzvahs have an objective and do something to you, 100%. Okay, so let's end here. Any final questions before we end?
Is there a good English translation of the Sefer HaGaon of the Rambam?
Yeah, there's an English one in here. I'll send the link if anyone wants to buy this. But this has an English translation too. And yes, as I mentioned last time, all the Kisvei Rambam tend to have bearing on things, even where you wouldn't notice it, even where you wouldn't expect it. If you read it closely. Okay, so see you next week. Shkoyach Moshe Mordechai, putting this together, and see you again next week, same time.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. Shkoyach Rabbi Burton.
Pleasure.